Hello, everybody. Welcome back here to the Wine with Jimmy channel. Delighted to have you on board and welcome to another in the series of Spain. This is the introduction to Spain or Spanish wine. So this is part 2 of the Spanish introduction series. So we went through history in the last video. This is on the kind of major climatic areas of Spain. Let's rock and roll talking about some of the major areas of Spain and how they differ. Now, you'll often hear that because of Spain's latitudinal position, and that being somewhere between 36 and 43 north, it's considered fairly hot. Or typically warm and hot. But it's not as easy as that because of its location sitting on the Atlantic and on the Mediterranean, and as a land mass that it has and mountain ranges, it's actually quite complex. And this map shows you that. So the extensive coastline, the several significant mountain ranges, and those large raised plateaus, the meseta covering the central regions, you can have real big marked differences in the climates. So first of all, you'll see where there's a green smidgen. So I must say that the blues are not really important for you here. The blues are mountainous areas where we don't tend to find many vineyards, and they would be considered, I suppose, quite close towards alpine in their climatic definition. But we are looking at the areas really here, the green area, not the green bit that comes down here, but really green from San Sebastian through Bilbao, Santander, Coruña to Galicia. And this is actually an area that we call typically green Spain. And that's because the rainfall here ensures a rather lush landscape. In your text, they just call it North Spain, but you might see it written as Green Spain as well. So, of course, the big thing here is its proximity to this big blue mass, which is the Atlantic Ocean. So the influence here is very, very high indeed of the Atlantic. So we have a maritime climate in this north area with high levels of rainfall throughout the year. So we have rainfall, which is the major risk factor here. The west coast, which is Galicia, in some parts, in some years, can receive up to 2,000 millimeters of rain. But typically the wine regions like Rías Baixas, which of course is found for, very famed for Albariño, that's where we get really around 1,000 millimeters of rain a year, which is still rather significant. As you go inland from the coast of green Spain, so heading towards the Ribera Sacra and towards Bierzo in Castilla y Leon, for example, it gets, of course, drier. You can get summer drought here, though, and winters tend to be mild with heavy rainfall. Not much snow, but heavy rainfall. So we therefore know that the cold conditions and also the wet conditions, certainly with autumnal rainfall, means that you need earlier ripening varieties in this area. But I want to mention another thing here, because we're really just, all we're talking about there is that green area, which was Galicia up here, and then really a thin part of the north coast, which is areas like Asturias, Cantabria, and then the Basque country. But there aren't many vines there. The Basque has a bit more than the previous two. Most of the vines are in Galicia, and certainly in the southern section. But we will talk about regions being in North Spain that aren't in those areas that I've just discussed. They're not in green Spain. Places like Rioja. So Rioja is here. Let me get, I will draw this in, let's do this in red. I think that's always the good one. So it's all this area here. That is Rioja. And we classify it as a northern region. But the big thing here is that regions like Rioja, or even Bierzo, which is over here, and anything along the Duero River, which is here, like Rueda, Toro, and of course Ribera del Duero, all of these wine regions are sheltered from the Atlantic effect by an extensive mountain range, which is highlighted in red. It's outlined in red up there. And that mountain range is the Cantabrian mountain range, a very significant mountain range indeed. It's dramatic. It has the Picos di Europa in the middle of it, which is really wonderful. Great cheese from there as well. So let me put that up here, Cantabrian mountain range. Now, the Cantabrian runs from Galicia all the way to the Pyrenees, where that line is, you see here. And of course, it provides a wonderful natural barrier against the Atlantic. So therefore, vineyards, even though they are considered northernly, like Rioja and Bierzo, we would still classify their climate as continental because of their sheltered from the Atlantic effect that you have seen just there. If you have questions, comments, concerns, please do get in touch. You can do so by commenting on this video below. Make sure you click like and subscribe because it helps everybody and anybody. Now, we're going to move from North Spain down to East Spain. So everywhere from sort of Catalonia and Barcelona. So from Empordà to Barcelona, Tarragona, Valencia, and Alicante, all the way down here. And this is our East Spain location. Now, this, of course, is firmly on the Mediterranean, whereas, of course, the North Coast was firmly on the Atlantic. The climate here, therefore, is generally quite warm. It does have a moderating effect from the Mediterranean. We'll talk about that on the next slide. And as you head south, it gets increasingly warmer. And that's why there's actually an arid area down here, south of Murcia, and then heading towards Andalusia. So East Spain, many of the vineyards here are moderated by the influence of the sea or altitude. And that depends on their location, of course. Now, areas such as Valencia, which lies on the coast, experiences cold winters and hot summers moderated by those breezes. But the rainfall is really low here, typically somewhere around 250 to 400 millimeters per year, significantly lower than the average of, say, Galicia, which is around 1,000. So you're looking at about a quarter to a half of the total of Galicia. Central Spain, we are moving into that large orangey area, and hugely this area south of Madrid and north of Cordoba and north of the mountain ranges there, this area which is called the Meseta Central, which is a large plateau in the center of Spain, which sits at an altitude of about 600 to 900 meters. So this is not a sunken continental area. This is quite a raised continental area. It is mostly cut off from the influence of any sea by dominating encircling mountain ranges. So, of course, the Cantabrian mountain range at the top, but we have the Sistema Central, which is down here and kind of a second line of defense against the Atlantic. The Sistema Iberica. You've got the Sistema Beticus coming down here as well. You've got the Portuguese mountains on this other side and Portugal, really. So you have a real sort of centralized area. The climate here is extremely continental with hot days, cool nights, though altitude can actually help moderate the heat. And of course, we know a lot of places like Ribera del Duero are very much proud about their altitude. You'll find places like Sotillo in Ribera del Duero at 900 meters, or if you go towards Soria, which is towards the eastern part of Ribera, you go up to that very high altitude as well. So in this area, though, the Meseta specifically in the central Spain, the winter temperatures will fall below freezing, and summer temperatures are typically above 30, 35 degrees Celsius and in the 40s. Rainfall is very limited, typically around 400 to 500 millimeters. The summer temperatures can be further influenced and enhanced by the Azores High, which is an Azores anticyclone, which comes from the islands of Azores. It hovers over the Atlantic, south of the Azores, and shifts northward in summer. It brings the blue skies, like you see in this picture, dry air, and hot temperatures. Now, I mentioned that the very summer intense temperatures that we talked about here, and plus those Azores temperatures, they can be moderated by the effects of diurnal range as well, which specifically are better at higher altitude or high altitude just generally. About 80% of Castilla-La Mancha sits above 600 meters. I mentioned that classically 600 to 900 meters. Typically, though, fungal disease will remain less of a problem here. I'm going to talk more about that in the next video, but it's generally lower than, of course, you would compare up in the north coast, for example. Okay, so that brings me to the conclusion of the climate for the introduction to Spain. Of course, when we go through the very specific parts of Spain's regions, we'll go into more detail, more microclimatic detail. As always, any comments, questions or concerns, please do get in touch. You can do so by emailing, that's info@winewithjimmy.com, or comment on this video, put a question down in the comments section. And of course, if you find yourself in the UK, please come and say hi for a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Goodbye.